Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kathy Zoller, and I'm a developer with Mojotech. We have offices in Boulder and in Providence, Rhode Island. And yes, we are hiring. We're an agency, and we have a lot of different clients. We work on a lot of different stacks. And right now, I'm working with a Node application and React, also using some Scala. But my side project that I've been working on for about a year and a half has been rewriting an application from a Rails monolith to Elixir, Phoenix API backend, and React frontend. And the name of the application is called NitWiz. It was originally written in Rails with a lot of jQuery. And right now, I launched it about 3 weeks ago or so. And we have a small group of dedicated early adopters working on checking to see if everything is correct. So I'm happy it's up and running finally. And today I want to talk about the way the application chugged along, and now it is, I want to talk about 3 areas that I used to get me to the MVP. How many of you out there are web developers? Because this is a pretty practical talk. Basically, I deal with a lot with file uploads, manipulating SVGs, and that kind of thing. And I also use Ecto Multi quite a bit, or Multi, whichever way you want to say it. And found that recursion was a huge boon in allowing me to add extra functionality that I didn't have before. So, and how many of you knit? Probably anybody? Anybody know anybody that knits? Well, it really doesn't matter because these same principles can be applied in a lot of different places, manufacturing, science, etc. But knitting is relaxing, in case you want to know, and a lot of people do. So let's get started with file uploads. Basically, Arc is the primary hex package that is used for file uploads. As with the Ruby gems, carrier wave, and paperclip, you can do all kinds of image transforms and processing, thumbnails, etc., using ImageMagick, same idea. But that's about where the similarity ends. When you're using Arc, you're returning a tuple, and either the upload was successful, so you get an OK with the name of the file, or error with the invalid file, and you can work with either of those returns to take the next step. And Arc takes advantage of a plug upload struct, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. But the other thing is that if you want to integrate scope on a record, you'll need to integrate with Arc Ecto. And Arc Ecto provides a cast attachments function that you can use, and it's pretty much a standard function that you use in this change set. And here you see the change set where you have the regular cast function, and it's piped down to the cast attachments function for the params that are used for the image upload. And here you can configure the uploader. Arc lets you, provides a directory at the top level. And for each type of image that you want to upload, you can create an uploader. And here I've got the path set to use S3. That's where I have everything uploaded. And the other thing you want to know, I actually went back too far. So the first gotcha that you have with Arc and Arc Ecto, actually, really, is that if you want to scope to a record ID, you need to make sure that record exists before you do that. I found that the easiest way to do that is, even if I'm just creating and I want somebody to upload an image, then I'll just create the record and go back and use a different update change set to work around that fact. so that I can scope it correctly. And the other thing is that since a lot of times I'm using Phoenix as an API, and a lot of people do, especially if they work in JavaScript, you'll need to set an ACL to public read, and it's very simple to do right here in the uploader. Rather than, you don't even need, at that point, you don't even need to set up a CORS description up in Amazon. So let me show you the basic process, and then I'll go into something that I enjoy talking about, which is the file manipulation. The basic process is pretty simple. You can do it for either this cute dog sweater design, maybe. Right now I only have women's sweaters on the site, but the next category will be, sorry. Can't get that on. Next category will be dog sweater designs after I finish doing sweaters. And I can't get that thing on very well, but that's okay. So here's a dog sweater, and here's a template for a dog sweater. Basically, I use templates, and you can manipulate the template. Either way, you'll need to upload it to S3. So in order to do that, I use the file reader from JavaScript. There. I use JavaScript's file reader, and then once the preview is done and the person's decided that's the one and they decide to update, then I have a Redux store, and I submit the photo update, the bottom line here, and then it's submitted to, it submits to an action which calls fetch. And then I use also form data to put the data in the correct, to the correct formation to send to the back end. And it's pretty simple. All I have to do, the only thing I have to do is, see right here, is set up the form data name for the file if I'm sending a file. Otherwise, I just send the data just the way it was sent from the form. So I do that, and then I post the form back to the back end, and that's all there is to it. It's very simple, a lot more straightforward than the old-fashioned way of using jQuery file uploads. And the only thing you have to remember with form data is that you must post the request. You can't use a patch request for updates. So you'll need to check your router and make sure you have that route set up. Here it's designs ID for the update, and it's a post request. Okay, so the endpoint receives the image data and all the other parameters from the front end, and these are how they come in. This is what they look like. And down here in the middle, we have the plug upload in use. And basically, the only thing you had to worry about sending from the front end, and I couldn't believe how easy it was and that it actually worked the first time I tried it, was the file name. Because the Arc uploader configures whatever the content type is, and the path is a plug upload gen server process. And that process sets up a temporary file path for your file coming from the front end. Once the upload is complete, either to a permanent location or to S3 or other CDN, then the path is removed and the process dies. So overall, I found, integrating Arc and Arc Ecto very, very straightforward, very simple, and faster to use, faster to develop with than any of the Rails gems I'd used before. I was very happy to leave jQuery file uploads alone, and the only time I would probably even consider it is if I had lots and lots and lots of files on the browser, but I don't anticipate that much of that in this application. One thing we do a lot of is SVG file manipulation, because here's my template and it's basically a path. And if you use how it works in NitWiz is that I copy the original template. In S3, that's a one-liner. If you're using your file server, then you can use either Elixir or Erlang and copy with their file module. But here's what the file actually looks like for that little doggy sweater template. And right here we have the path in the middle. It's the path element, and it's the D attribute it's called. But that, when you manipulate that, that's actually what changes the shape of the template. And here's an example. So this is a user interface, say. I've got the model behind the template, and you use a library such as D3 or Fabric.js. There may be other ones. Those are the only two I know of that allow you to capture all the data you need by manipulating the path on the canvas. And then here's the final project. But how do we save it? So we've got this temporary file, and we've got all the data we need, but we need to update the path, and we need to then push it back up to Amazon. So the way to do that is, in the old days, we would have used Nokogiri, and it's actually pretty concise. You just get the file path and the CSS and find the right place, and then you write to the new path. And that's all there is, except for that it took about 2.5 seconds. And so you just need to make sure you have a loading spinner going. But Elixir is a little more involved and a lot more performant. First of all, what I needed to do in Elixir, this is the Elixir code, is pattern match on the HTTP client request. And the reason for that is, highlight that, is because anything you pull down from Amazon S3 is going to give you a response whether or not the file exists. If you're just using your file server, then you just check to see if the file exists before you work with it. But in this case, I get the status code as well as the file body. And I create, if the status code is 200, I create a temporary path and a temporary directory, and then I write the file to that temporary path before I operate on it. And the next thing we need to do is actually transform the path, which is in the next slide. And again, I'll return a tuple because it's easy to work with tuples. And if the tuple says OK, that means the transform went through well. And then I will use the uploader again. In this case, it's the pattern image uploader. And this is the store is an arc function. And I get the pattern piece from the new temporary path and send it right on back up. And that's all there is to that. But the transform path is kind of an interesting function. It's the Elixir counterpoint to Nokogiri. So for the actual transformation, we use a hex package called Floki. And Floki provides several methods. One of them, what it does is it actually creates a list of a tree list of elements. And within that list of elements, you can find the actual attribute that you're looking for. Oops. In this case, I guess I'm searching for the D attribute, and what I want to do is manipulate it with the new path that I have, with the new information. And then, because the tree doesn't contain that information at the top for the document declaration, you need to prepend that to the XML before sending it back up. And then Floki has this raw HTML to convert it back into the document. So you save that to the file, and then you just send it up to S3 and you're done. So overall, I mean, it seems like a little more work, but it actually, I found using the file server that it took about 55 milliseconds to have this process working as opposed to over 2 seconds, so it's 20% of the time. With Amazon S3, maybe 100 to 200 milliseconds, with including the latency. So now we've got designs, we've got patterns, everybody's happy. They can use that stuff to make a sweater. What's next? Step 2 is Ecto Multi. Well, actually, step 2 is getting paid. And that's why I used Ecto Multi, because it's basically a set of, you can use it with a set of operations like as a database transaction that you want to either completely all succeed or all fail. And how many of you have used Ecto Multi before? It's really great. It's really great. Though when I was first learning Elixir, when I first started this project, I found it hard to understand the syntax right away because I was used to writing functions like this. This is Ruby, but Ruby, JavaScript, same thing. It's like a nested conditional. And so this is a real simple example where if you want to understand what's going on, you need to work all the way down through the function. It's basically sending a treat or applying a coupon. If there's no coupon, then if it's their birthday, then you might send a treat, but depends on if it's over $20 or under $20. And otherwise, you just say thank you. So anyway, if it's one of those things that, I mean, I'm used to looking at it because I write a lot of JavaScript, but in Elixir, when I first started, okay, I thought, well, I'm going to use guard clauses. And so that's what I started doing first. And here's the same idea written a different way with a guard clause. And you can see the two function clauses. But the problem I thought here was it's not that clear what's going on because here I've still got a case statement inside my first clause. And so I thought, well, another way to write this, because after looking at Ecto Multi for so many hours trying to figure it out, I figured this out. You can use one public function. You can pipe several functions down through, always returning a tuple, and it's very clear what's going on here. We're going to apply a coupon, we're going to check for the birthday, and we're going to send a treat, or not. Just depends, but all the major functions are right there. And here you can see I'm still using a guard clause, but I'm returning a tuple. And I might calculate the discount here, and then I might go ahead and check the birthday here. And here I'm matching on the tuples, pattern matching on the tuples to find out which clause to execute. So a combination of those things works in many, many cases. And it leads me to the Ecto Multi, because Ecto Multi uses the same, Ecto Multi uses the same principle. The only difference here is, well, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but syntactically, the difference is that each time I run through one of these functions and pipe through them, I'm actually storing data in a map that I can introspect later or do something with later if I need to. So what Ecto Multi is, if you haven't used it, it's a data structure for grouping multiple operations, usually repo operations, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And in addition to the run function, they also provide an insert, update, and delete functions. But I found it simpler to understand if I had all of my functions underneath and I used run every time so that I could see what I was doing in one file. So basically what happens is I'm retrieving a customer, and once I've retrieved the customer, I update the user, then I update the Stripe charge, and then I insert the order and insert the charge, and then finally I might send a dog treat. And if any of those fail, I'll get a return of an error at the bottom here, error, failed operation. It'll tell me which function failed and the ecto changes so far so I can introspect. Otherwise, it'll return a map saying a tuple with a map as a second argument, return values. And that's what I used in the controller function, so I could check on do some further manipulation of the data. And also, in the controller function, I was able to say, well, this errored out, and it gave the reason, and et cetera, usually because it was something wrong with the Stripe charge. But it also allows you to abstract away that error if you're going to use, a separate error handling module or something like that. So, so I've gotten paid. Let's say everything worked out okay. My Ecto Multi returned all the values with an OK as a first argument, and it's got all that accumulated data, and therefore the magic word is accumulated, which leads me to my third topic and last topic, which is recursion. I probably couldn't have added the functionality that I have in the application without it. And so, for example, I can show you with a little example here. I'm going to make my dog a bumblebee costume for Halloween. And when I want to do that, I want to add these stripes, but maybe the stripes don't match up with the shape of the dog sweater. And normally I'll have a single function for each type of shape. Is it a trapezoid? Here you've got a little parabola at the very end and sort of a triangle up here at the front. But if your stripes and your shapes don't match up, that's where you can use recursion, because you're juxtaposing two different individual ideas in the same place. Also, I might not even know how many stripes per section. So this is kind of an idea of what I did. I had an accumulator, and I went from one section to the next section and built a sweater based on the sections. And of course, it's a little more complex because you've got people's measurements and things like that in there too. But the idea is the same. So I go from one section, and in section 1, for example, I want to check the height, and I know I've got the stripe height and I've got the shape piece height. And so I do like a little leapfrog, and I say, well, okay, if the stripe height is less than the shape height, then I just go back to the next section. But otherwise, I need to do a recursive function and keep going back and forth over and over until I hit the end of that section. Then I move on to the next function. And it worked really well to develop auto-generate instructions that way, because once I've got the functions done, I use them over and over everywhere in the app whenever I need to. And there was a bunch of math, but once I solved it for one case, I solved it for every case, so it was really nice. And then, so I guess that's what I wanted to say about how recursion helped me make the app really what I wanted it to be, so that the knitters could use any kind of, they could design the sweaters, they could generate instructions, excuse me, using any yarn or pattern stitch they desired to use and auto-generate the instructions without having to do any math. So that's everything I wanted to say today, and say thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Can I have some of this? This is for me.
So it sounds like you've done some Rails work for a while, and then you've been doing some Phoenix work. Can you talk about the efficiencies of moving from one to the other? Like, do you feel yourself like moving much faster using Elixir, or you think it's about the same, or?
Do you say the efficiency?
Right, in coding. I'm talking more of the coding, not the performance part of it.
I couldn't hear you that last
I mean
part.
the efficiency of developing, as far as like the time spending coding rather than the time.
Oh, the time spent coding. Well, okay, I did keep track of all the time I spent coding. I added a lot more functionality in the Elixir app than I had in the Rails app. But if I had broken probably 1,100 hours, it's about 60,000 lines, maybe a little more now. But if I broke it down, it would be, I figured, about the same time of full-time programming, say 5 months, 5 to 6 months. Either way, it's just that the Elixir app is so much more performant. Also, well, you do have to keep in mind that my UX, my UI is much nicer because I'm using the React front end and I can do a lot more with it. I had an awful lot of buttons before. So just with Rails templating system. So it's sort of like writing 2 apps. The Elixir part is just wonderful. I can't believe well, if I didn't know Rails, then I wouldn't know what I have now. But that's what I said too when I learned Rails, and I had been doing PHP programming before that. So.
Anybody else?
Hi, thank you for your talk.
You're welcome.
I used to teach at a coding school, and my students were learning Rails, but that's not my background. And a lot of them have expressed interest in functional programming, maybe because I was a good teacher in planting that seed. But I'm curious if you were going to give, there are a lot of people who start with Rails and start with Ruby in their learning to program journey. If you were going to give someone with that level of experience some advice about trying out Elixir and Phoenix, is there any advice that you would give them in making that leap from Rails to Phoenix, if maybe that's only the second framework someone's ever used?
Yes, I do have a piece of advice, and I didn't put it in my talk, and I meant to, which was don't be afraid to get started, because as you learn a language, and I know that I don't know nearly as much as a lot of Elixir programmers, since it's a side project for me and not my full-time job, but don't be afraid to get started, because you can always refactor, you can always go back and change the way you've written something before, or you can just, you probably will continue to evolve the way you write things in the future anyhow. So the main difference is, of course, the way you think about programming, immutable data, and et cetera, JavaScript, and well, aside from React, which really frowns on mutable data, but if you can assign things all the time, you're going to have a slower language, I think. I think that's the takeaway there. So the way you think about writing functions is different, but it's still, you can get started, because you can still do an if-then construction in Elixir if you want to. So it's not limiting that way. Anybody else? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you deploy the Phoenix app?
Oh,
now?
yes. So if Jesse's here, thank you very much. I used a gig Elixir. I decided I didn't want to spend 2 weeks of my life learning Kubernetes right now for all 10 users that I have doing the beta testing. So, and actually, I'd used Heroku a little bit, but in the old days, I did do a lot of Capistrano deploys, and I knew it could be a real headache. So I used gig Elixir. It took me maybe 2-3 hours, a couple emails. I forgot where to I kept thinking, well, I know I don't update my version in the package.json, because you don't. For Elixir, it's in your mix.exs. And I forgot, so I had to email about that. But other than that, it went really well. So it was very simple. Very simple.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.